What's worse for a father, his child going hungry, or going to jail himself? Marcus Thompson faced this terrible dilemma as he stood before Judge Frank Caprio's bench. At 19 years old, he was barely more than a child himself, yet the weight of fatherhood pressed heavily on his young shoulders. The Providence Municipal Court was unusually quiet that Tuesday morning. The usual chatter of court officers and the rustle of papers seemed muted, as if the building itself sensed the gravity of the cases about to unfold. Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the docket. Next up, Marcus Thompson, charged with excessive speeding minus 65 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone. When Marcus entered the courtroom, Judge Caprio immediately noticed something different about this defendant. Unlike the usual mix of defiance, nervousness, or resignation he typically saw, this young man carried himself with a peculiar combination of determination and desperation. His clothes were clean but worn, his sneakers had seen better days, and his hands shook slightly as he approached the podium. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio began, his voice carrying its characteristic warmth despite the formal setting. "I see here you're charged with excessive speeding. The officer clocked you at 65 in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. That's quite a bit over the limit." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Yes, Your Honor. I know it was wrong." "Well, let's hear what happened. What were you doing driving so fast at 11:47 at night?" This was the moment Marcus had been dreading and rehearsing simultaneously for weeks. How do you explain to a judge that you were speeding because your 3-week-old son was crying from hunger, and the only store still open was about to close? How do you make someone understand that sometimes breaking the law feels like the only way to be a good father? "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice barely above a whisper, my baby son was crying. He was hungry, and we were out of formula. The store was about to close, and I panicked." Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, studying the young man before him. In his decades on the bench, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people. He could spot a lie from across the courtroom, but he could also recognize genuine distress just as easily. What he saw in Marcus Thompson was not the typical excuse-making of someone trying to avoid a ticket. This was raw, honest desperation. "How old are you, Marcus?" 19, Your Honor. "And how old is your son?" 3 weeks and 2 days, Marcus replied without hesitation, the precision suggesting he was counting every day of his child's life. 3 weeks, Judge Caprio repeated thoughtfully. "That's very young, both you and the baby. Are you married?" Marcus's shoulders sagged slightly. "No, Your Honor. The mother... she left right after the birth. Said she wasn't ready to be a mom. It's just me and my son now." A murmur rippled through the courtroom gallery. Even Inspector Quinn, who had seen it all during his years working with Judge Caprio, shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't just about a speeding ticket anymore. "What's your son's name?" Judge Caprio asked, his voice softer now. "Elijah," Marcus said, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, a small smile crossed his face. "Elijah, Marcus Thompson? That's a beautiful name. Biblical. Means my God is Yahweh. Do you know that?" "Yes, sir. My grandmother taught me that. She said Elijah was a prophet who never gave up, no matter how hard things got." Judge Caprio nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. Is she helping you with the baby?" The smile faded from Marcus's face. "She passed away last year, Your Honor, cancer. She was the one who raised me after my parents, after they left." The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the court reporter paused her typing, caught up in the unfolding story. Judge Caprio removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture those familiar with his courtroom recognized as his way of processing emotionally heavy testimony. "So you're raising this baby all by yourself?" "Yes, sir. I dropped out of college when he was born. I was on a partial scholarship to Providence College, studying to be a teacher, but I couldn't manage classes and taking care of Elijah, so I left school and got a job." "What kind of work are you doing?" "I work at a warehouse, loading trucks. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It pays $12.50 an hour. And they let me bring Elijah with me sometimes when I can't find anyone to watch him." Judge Caprio did quick mental math. Night shift, minimum wage, single father, 3-week-old baby. The financial reality was stark and unforgiving. And on the night you were speeding, you were on your way to work. No, Your Honor, I had just gotten off work. I came home and Elijah was crying. Mrs. Rodriguez, she's my neighbor who watches him sometimes, she said he'd been fussing all night. When I checked, we were completely out of formula. The bottle was empty and there wasn't any powder left. Marcus paused, his voice beginning to crack with emotion. I've never heard him cry like that before. It was like he was in pain. And I knew he was hungry, and I was the only one who could fix it. So you got in your car and drove to the store? Yes, sir. But it was almost midnight, and I knew the grocery store closed at midnight. I was afraid I wouldn't make it in time, and then Elijah would have to wait until morning to eat. I see OULDN, single quotes, I couldn't let my son go hungry. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his elbows on the bench. Marcus, I want you to understand something. I'm not condoning speeding. What you did was dangerous to yourself and to other drivers. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor, I know it was wrong. I've been beating myself up about it ever since. What if I had crashed? What if I had hurt someone? Then Elijah would have no one at all. But you didn't crash, and you did get to the store in time. Yes, sir. I bought formula diapers and some baby food for when he's older. Used the last $47 I had until payday. Inspector Quinn, who had been listening intently, found himself thinking about his own children and grandchildren. He remembered those sleepless nights, the panic when something was wrong, the desperate measures that parenthood sometimes demanded. Judge Caprio stood up from his chair and walked around to the front of the bench, something he rarely did during regular proceedings. He wanted to look Marcus in the eye without the barrier of the judicial bench between them. Marcus, let me ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. If you found yourself in the exact same situation tomorrow night, hungry baby, empty formula container, store about to close, what would you do? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus knew this was a test, but he also knew he couldn't lie to this judge, who was treating him with more respect and kindness than he'd experienced in months. Your Honor, I'd like to say I'd call a taxi or ask someone for help, but honestly, if my son was hungry and crying, and I was the only one who could help him, I'd probably do the same thing again. I know that's not the right answer legally, but as a father, I can't let my child suffer if I can prevent it. The honesty of the answer struck everyone in the courtroom. This wasn't a calculated response designed to win sympathy. This was a young man being completely truthful about the impossible choices that poverty and single parenthood had thrust upon him. Judge Caprio walked back to his bench, but remained standing. Marcus, do you have any family who can help you? No, sir. Like I said, my grandmother was all I had, and she's gone. My parents left when I was 8. I've got some cousins in other states, but we don't really talk. What about friends from college? Marcus's laugh was bitter. Most of them don't understand why I left school for a baby. They think I threw my life away. They're probably right. No, Judge Caprio said firmly, they're not right. Taking responsibility for your child doesn't throw your life away. It changes your life, yes, but it doesn't destroy it. Some of the best people I know had to grow up fast because life demanded it of them. The judge sat back down and opened the case file. Marcus, I'm looking at your record here. This is your first offense. No prior tickets, no criminal history. Clean driving record up until this incident. Yes, sir. And you're working full-time supporting a baby trying to do the right thing, even though you're basically still a kid yourself. I'm trying, Your Honor. Some days I feel like I'm drowning, but I'm trying. Judge Caprio was quiet for a long moment, and those who knew him well could see he was wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke. Marcus, the fine for excessive speeding is normally $185 plus court costs. For someone in your situation, that might as well be $1,850. Am I right? Yes, sir. I was hoping maybe I could do community service instead, or payment plan, or something. That money would buy formula for almost 3 weeks. Here's what I'm going to do, Judge Caprio said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used for official pronouncements. I'm going to dismiss this case entirely. No fine, no court costs, no points on your license. A gasp went up from the gallery. Marcus looked stunned, as if he couldn't quite process what he'd heard. But the judge continued, raising his hand, "I have some conditions." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Anything, Your Honor?" "First, you're going to be more careful driving. I don't care how urgent the situation feels. Dead fathers can't take care of their babies. If you're ever in an emergency again, you call 911. The police will help you get where you need to go safely." "Yes, sir." "Second, I want you to look into some resources. There are programs in this city for young fathers, WIC for formula assistance, childcare programs, even educational grants for people in your situation. Inspector Quinn is going to give you some phone numbers before you leave here today." Inspector Quinn nodded, already making notes. "Third," Judge Caprio continued, "I want you to consider going back to school, maybe not full-time right away, but part-time. Night classes, online courses, something. That teaching degree you were working on? The world needs good teachers, especially ones who understand what it means to fight for someone you love. I don't know if I can afford it, Your Honor." "That's why you're going to call those numbers Inspector Quinn gives you. There are grants, scholarships, programs specifically for people in your situation. You might be surprised what's available." Marcus was fighting back tears now. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say. Thank you, seems too small." "Don't thank me yet," Judge Caprio said with a slight smile. "I have one more condition." "Yes, sir?" "I want you to bring that baby to see me in 6 months. I want to meet Elijah Marcus Thompson and see how you're both doing." Now Marcus was openly crying. "Yes, sir, I will, I promise." "And Marcus, you're not throwing your life away. You're building one. It's harder than most people your age have to deal with, but you're doing it. And from what I can see, you're doing it well." As Marcus gathered his few belongings and prepared to leave, Judge Caprio called out one more time, "Marcus, what does Elijah look like? Does he look like his daddy?" Marcus's whole face lit up. "Everyone says he looks just like me, but he's got these bright eyes that seem to see everything. And when he's not crying because he's hungry, he makes these little sounds like he's trying to talk to me. It sounds like he's going to be a smart one. Make sure you read to him, even though he's little. Babies absorb more than we think. I do, Your Honor. Every night before bed, I read him stories. My grandmother used to read to me." As Marcus left the courtroom, Inspector Quinn approached the bench. "Judge, that was something special." Judge Caprio nodded, watching the young man disappear through the doors. "You know, Quinn, I've been doing this job for a long time. I've seen people use every excuse in the book to avoid responsibility, but that young man, he wasn't making excuses. He was making impossible choices with no good options." "Think he'll really come back in 6 months?" "Oh, he'll be back. Not because I ordered him to, but because he's proud of his son and wants to show him off. That's what good fathers do." Later that afternoon, as Judge Caprio reviewed other cases, he found his mind wandering back to Marcus Thompson. There was something about the young man that reminded him of other cases he'd seen over the years, people who found themselves in impossible situations, forced to choose between following the law and doing what felt morally right. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that he'd made the right decision. Justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about recognizing when someone was already carrying a burden, heavy enough to teach them whatever lesson a fine might provide. 6 months later, on a bright Tuesday morning, Marcus Thompson returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom. This time, he wasn't alone. In his arms, he carried a chubby, alert 6-month-old baby with bright, curious eyes. Judge Caprio, Marcus said, his voice stronger and more confident than it had been during his first visit. "I'd like you to meet Elijah." The baby looked around the courtroom with wide eyes, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with the fearless curiosity that only babies possess. When his gaze landed on Judge Caprio, he broke into a gummy smile that lit up his entire face. "He's beautiful, Marcus. Absolutely beautiful. And you look good, too. Different." Marcus was, indeed, different. He stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, and there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "I wanted to thank you again, Judge, and to let you know how we're doing. I took your advice about those programs. Elijah and I are getting help with formula and food through WIC, and I found a great daycare that has subsidized spots for working parents." "That's wonderful. And school?" "I'm taking 2 classes online education courses." It's slow going, but I'm making progress. My goal is to finish my degree by the time Elijah starts kindergarten. That's quite a goal. You think you can do it? Marcus looked down at his son, who was now trying to grab the microphone cord. For him, I can do anything. As father and son prepared to leave, Judge Caprio stood up once more. Marcus, before you go, I want to tell you something. That night when you were speeding to get formula for Elijah, you broke the law. But you didn't break faith with your responsibilities as a father. Sometimes those two things conflict, and when they do, we have to hope that justice is wise enough to tell the difference. Thank you, Judge, for everything. Don't thank me, thank yourself. And thank this little guy for making you into the man you were meant to be. After they left, Inspector Quinn approached the bench again. Judge, I've got to ask, how did you know? How did you know he was telling the truth that first day? Judge Caprio thought for a moment. You know, Quinn, after all these years, I've learned that you can usually tell the difference between someone who's making excuses and someone who's making hard choices. Marcus wasn't trying to get out of responsibility, he was trying to live up to it. Think we'll see them again? I hope so. But next time, I hope it's because he wants to show me his college diploma, not because he's in trouble. The story of Marcus Thompson and his son Elijah became something of a legend in the Providence Municipal Court. It was a reminder that behind every case file, every citation, every defendant who stood before the bench, there was a human story. Some stories were about bad choices and poor judgment. But some, like Marcus's, were about impossible situations and the lengths that love will drive us to. In the end, Judge Caprio's decision to dismiss the case wasn't just about mercy, it was about recognizing that sometimes the law serves justice best when it steps aside and lets humanity take the lead. Marcus Thompson was speeding that night not because he was reckless or irresponsible, but because he was exactly the opposite. He was a young man taking responsibility for another human being, even when that responsibility seemed bigger than he was. The measure of justice Judge Caprio had learned over his many years on the bench wasn't always in the punishment meted out, but in the recognition of what was truly right and wrong. And sometimes, the most right thing a person could do might require breaking a rule or two along the way. As for Marcus and Elijah Thompson, their story continued long after that courtroom encounter. True to his word, Marcus finished his degree, becoming a teacher who understood firsthand what it meant to fight for the people you love. And Elijah grew up knowing that his father had once stood before a judge and been found worthy not of punishment, but of compassion. Years later, when Elijah was old enough to understand the story, Marcus would tell him about Judge Frank Caprio and the lesson he learned that day, that justice and mercy aren't opposites, but partners in the ongoing work of making the world a little more fair, one case at a time. The young father's dilemma had become a young father's triumph, proving that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most important victories.